It was a quiet evening in late October when the Callahan family checked into the old hotel nestled in a small, forgotten town in the heart of the United States. John and Rebecca, both in their late 30s, had decided to take their two children, Emily, aged 10, and Charlie, aged 6, on a weekend getaway to celebrate the end of the school year. The air was crisp, the trees a fiery mix of red, orange, and yellow, and the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows over the empty streets. Their destination, the Hollow Springs Inn. An establishment that had been in operation since the 1800s, with a history as long as the town itself. It was charming in its own way, with its weathered brick exterior, vintage wallpaper in the hallways, and squeaky wooden floors that seemed to echo the whispers of a past long gone. The hotel had recently been refurbished, though, with modern amenities, Wi-Fi, flat-screen TVs, and heated pools. Everything seemed fine at first glance. But there was something about the place that didn't feel entirely right. The check-in process was quick. The receptionist, a pale woman in her 50s with sharp features, greeted them with a thin smile. "Room 111, she said, handing over the keys. "It's a bit special, but you'll enjoy your stay." Rebecca, slightly confused, smiled back. "Special? In what way?" The receptionist paused, her eyes darting briefly toward the ceiling before she quickly cleared her throat. "Oh, nothing to worry about. Just an old room. All the charm, you know? Just make sure not to wander after dark. The hallways can get a little strange." John chuckled, trying to brush off the odd remark. "Thanks for the warning," he said, taking the keys and leading his family toward the elevator. Room 111 was located on the third floor, at the far end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a spacious room with antique furniture, an oversized four-poster bed, a velvet armchair near the window, and an old oak wardrobe in the corner. There was a musty smell in the air, but it wasn't enough to turn them away. Emily immediately rushed to the window, pressing her face against the glass and peering out into the darkening evening. "This place is so cool," she said, excited by the large, vintage feel of the room. Charlie ran toward the bed, jumping up and down. "I want to sleep here tonight." Rebecca smiled at her children's enthusiasm. "Well, it's going to be our home for the next couple of days, so let's make the most of it." John, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed the edges of the curtains fluttering in an almost unnatural way, even though the window was firmly closed. It felt like there was a draft, yet there was no source for it. He shrugged it off, figuring it was just the building's age catching up with it. After unpacking, the Callahans decided to take a walk around the town. They enjoyed a casual dinner at a local diner, with the owner, an elderly man with a deep southern drawl, telling them stories about the history of Hollow Springs. He mentioned the hotel briefly but spoke of it in hushed tones, as if not wanting to draw attention to its past. "You folks be careful with that hotel," he said, leaning in closer. "A lot of strange things happen there. You might think it's all harmless at first, but you'd be wrong. Stay away from room 111 if you know what's good for YA." John laughed, thinking the man was just playing a part to entertain the tourists. "Thanks for the tip," he said, dismissing it as an old man's superstition. By the time they returned to the hotel, the sun had set, and the building had taken on an even more eerie presence. The hallway was now completely dark, with only dim lights flickering overhead. As they reached room 111, Rebecca unlocked the door, and they stepped inside. The temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. The warm air they had left behind now felt cold, almost icy. Emily and Charlie were already climbing into bed, their faces glowing with excitement from the day's adventures. But John and Rebecca both felt a lingering sense of unease. The room seemed to hum with a strange energy. John went to the bathroom to wash up, and when he returned, he noticed the shadows in the room seemed deeper, darker, as if they were moving on their own. The corner of the room, near the wardrobe, felt especially cold. He could almost feel someone, or something, watching him. He shook his head, trying to rationalize the feeling. It was just the stress of travel, he told himself. Rebecca, however, was having her own unsettling experience. She had heard faint footsteps in the hallway, light and quick, as if someone were running. But when she opened the door to check, no one was there. "John," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I think we should go down to the lobby and ask for a different room." Before John could respond, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped even further. Charlie, who had been playing with his toy car, suddenly stopped and looked toward the wardrobe. His eyes widened in terror. "Mommy, Daddy, there's someone in the closet." Rebecca and John turned, but the wardrobe door was closed. There was no sound, no movement. It was as if the room had frozen. That night, the haunting escalated. The family barely slept. Emily had nightmares of shadowy figures standing by her bed, whispering things she couldn't understand. Charlie was up several times, screaming that he saw someone standing in the hallway. But when John opened the door, nothing was there. By morning, the Callahans were exhausted and on edge. John, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize it all. "Old buildings do strange things," he muttered. "There's got to be a logical explanation for everything." But that afternoon, when Rebecca returned from the lobby after a visit to the front desk, she looked pale, her face etched with fear. She pulled John aside. "They know about room 111, she whispered, her voice shaking. "They told me it's been the site of strange occurrences for decades. People have disappeared. Some have claimed to see figures in the mirrors, others have heard voices, like someone's calling their name. And the last family who stayed here, well, they didn't make it out." John's heart raced. He was beginning to believe there was something more to the hotel than just age and wear. The stories he had dismissed as superstition were starting to feel all too real. On their last night, the atmosphere in room 111 became suffocating. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the air was thick with tension. Emily was crying, clutching her stuffed bear tightly, while Charlie refused to leave his parents' side. The mirrors began to fog up, even though the room was far too cold for condensation to form. As they huddled together in the center of the room, the door to the wardrobe slowly creaked open on its own. The temperature dropped so sharply that their breaths fogged in the air. And then, it began. Soft whispers, like distant voices, echoed through the room, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. The shadows in the corner began to twist, taking on shapes that no one could explain. John grabbed Rebecca's hand, pulling her and the children toward the door. "Run," he whispered, his voice a mix of fear and determination. But as they reached the hallway, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, trapping them in the dark corridor. The whispers grew louder, now unmistakably coming from behind them. They turned to see a shadowy figure emerging from the dark, its form barely discernible but its presence unmistakable. It was time to leave. The Callahans never returned to Hollow Springs Inn. They checked out the next morning, their spirits broken, their nerves frazzled, and their minds haunted by the horrors they'd experienced in room 111. They left town, but the memory of that night stayed with them forever. No one else dared to stay in room 111 after the Callahans left. The hotel eventually closed its doors, and Hollow Springs faded into obscurity. But some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the faint whispers of those who were lost in that cursed room, waiting for someone else to wander in and disturb the silence once more. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A shadow in the corner of your eye, a cold draft in a room that should be warm, or a voice when no one else is around? Share your own paranormal experiences with us. Who knows, your story might be the next to haunt room 111.